But we continue then to with our discussion, the story of the United States Justice Department this week announcing a settlement deal of over $1 billion with Swiss-Anglo Mining Company Glencore after the company agreed to plead guilty in two separate criminal cases. We are now joined by Peter Major, the Director of Mining at Mergence Corporate Solutions. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thanks so very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Thank you very much for making the time.
You're most welcome. In light of what's happening with regards to Glencore, let's talk about how prevalent this particular practice is by some international companies coming in to obtain and retain business with entities in African countries, by handing out bribes and getting their way through other dubious ways.
Look, this shows the difficulty of operating over many different nations, different countries, different time zones, different governments, different businesses. Glencore is a trader. They buy and sell other people's commodities. They're a miner. They build mines. They operate mines. So I think there's very few companies as diversified in the world as Glencore. They are all over the planet. Very large company, as you point out. They're $100 billion, $1.5 trillion. I'm not sure what their employees are, but I think it's over 100,000 employees. This company is much larger than Anglo American. It's much more spread out. So when you're operating in so many spheres, so many countries, there can be fine lines between breaking the law in one country and that being perfectly legal and normal in another country. Yeah. And we know that the buck stops with the man at the top. But when you got 100,000 employees, it's pretty hard to know what all of them are doing all the time. And each of those employees is managing people underneath, and they often deal with locals, helping them do transactions. So it is complicated. Who was bribing who knew about it? And the U.S. Justice Department is probably the most well-funded, well-sourced Justice Department on the planet. And yet we hear how short they are of staff. They're short of funds. And that's where you get settlements. And you might have a good case, but if you see this case could drag on and on for years, and is it benefiting anybody? If it benefits more people by having an early settlement, let's do that. But yes, South Africa has its own share of bribery and corruption to deal with, and how we deal with it's going to be watched by the whole world.
Exactly. So, you're talking about, the kind of figures that you're throwing with regards to, just how powerful Glencore is financially. I heard you talking about $100 billion. And that makes me then question whether, this particular penalty for a mining giant like Glencore to pay a $1 billion fine after pleading guilty to graft, to market manipulation, essentially corruption. Is that enough? I mean, is that really even a dent? I mean, I'll just say this. Of course, we had the State Capture Commission here in South Africa, and many South Africans were pleading and saying, we want to see people in orange overalls. We want to see people in prison. To find such a big company, $1 billion, can one then say this is enough? And I don't think it's enough to say, whether or not there's time or resources in terms of, letting it go and just giving this one settlement figure. Surely it should be easy enough to figure out who was involved, who did the bribing, and I don't see why that's problematic, why we can't get to the bottom of it.
No, I'm sure they got to the bottom of it. I don't think the U.S. would have done this settlement without getting to the very bottom. I think an important question is, you say $1 billion is too small. What was the crime? If the crime was invading another country and killing 10,000 people and destroying the country, maybe $1 billion is pretty small. If the country was letting containers go through that would have gone through anyways, but they let the containers go through in a week instead of sitting at the border for a month, then you might think the $1 billion is too big. So I don't know what the specific crime was. And that's the only way we can judge. Is $1 billion too much, or is $1 billion fine too little? We need to know what the crime was and who was involved. Was this crime against a whole country? And often, I don't want to, we can say white collar crime. One of the problems with white collar crime is can't always find who the victim was. And when you hear the word facilitation fees, some countries call a facilitation fee a bribe. Other countries allow you, it's tax deductible, because the facilitation allows something to happen. It would have happened anyways, but it happened quicker, sooner, smoother. So I don't know that, but I'd like to make one point here before you cut me off, is we always hear how these big, giant, dominant businesses have their way. That is not true necessarily. If we have learned anything in South Africa that the Guptas taught us very well, you can be a small startup beginning from scratch. And if you were bribing the right people, the Guptas were nobody. Nobody knew who they were until long after Mr. Zuma was president. And yet, if you look at the bribes they were paying to get things done, the whole world was falling off their chairs laughing. They were paying pennies where foreigners would pay millions, tens of millions. They'd ask for a percentage, like 10, 20. And yet the Guptas proved how small you can be and how small of bribes you have to offer to get what we did in South Africa, to get South Africans to do bad things. So bribery can come from any direction, small, medium, big. Entrepreneurs and megalithic companies.
Now that the spotlight has been put on Glencore, one then needs to ask the question of, how this would affect, the mining sector in South Africa, and if there'll be more of, a spotlight shone on some of the other companies that have indeed been operating and are operating in the country. Do you think that this will change things, or it will just, we'll just move on and carry on as per normal?
I think, hope and pray this does change things. And I know a lot of the CEOs in companies that have told me they will react differently if we keep pursuing this. They will be so positively motivated to come back here in force, to start spending money here. So I think this is good all around. I don't know one person at any of the companies I come across that is worried about this. They just wish it would have been happening years ago, decades ago. And I only see positive coming out of this for all companies. And I mean Glencore on down. And it's hard to believe Glencore got bullied, but when you read a lot of these affidavits, it looks to me like they were getting bullied. It shows. If you got political weight behind you, you can bully anybody you want. So this is good news, I think, and all companies will react. This has got to help our case for getting foreign investment. It shows we're serious and genuine.
When there's been a whiff of corruption, what we've also seen in South Africa is cases where certain people's bank accounts were closed. Certain companies' bank accounts have been closed. In this particular case, we see a situation where Glencore has admitted to certain crimes here. Do you think, maybe I should say, should South Africa take this seriously? And in fact, we see that the rules are applied actually equally, and see some of the banking accounts that were linked to Glencore in fact shut down, as we've seen it being done to the Guptas. I mean, I use the Guptas because it's an example that you use, so I'm taking you back there.
Look, the law was designed for everybody. When God gave Moses 10 commandments, I don't remember there being any fine print on those tablets, that it applies to certain races, certain creeds, certain magnitudes of wealth. Yes, the law must be applied so equally to all parties. And I don't think Glencore would complain about this. Why do you close someone's bank account? There's various reasons for doing it. And we know the Gupta's bank's accounts were closed because there were massive amounts of money going out of this country. And it was draining this country of needed foreign exchange. And even worse, most of that money seemed to be coming from government. It wasn't coming from the profit of selling minerals that were mined out of the ground after paying wages. It was coming directly from taxpayers. But I don't think anyone's going to complain if someone closed one of Glencore's bank accounts if they were doing something similar to what the Guptas were when their bank account was closed. It's just got to be applied equally and transparent. None of this can be too transparent and visible for all to see and judge.
All right, Peter, thanks very much for your input. You appreciate it very much. Peter Major, the Director of Mining at Mergence Corporate Solutions. Many thanks to you.